Hi lovely humans, this is going to be a video about long distance relationship, and this is why I have my lovely girlfriend with me. This is going to be a video in English because I have with me my American girlfriend. And if you don't know me, if you're just stumbling on this channel, I am Clara, I'm 23, I'm French, and I have lived briefly in China, the US and the UK, but I currently reside in France. And you can introduce yourself.
And I'm Bet, and I'm also 23, and I grew up in America, and I am going to school in Canada right now.
Yeah, so since we've been together for over 2.5 years, and over 2 years long distance at this point, so we have some experience doing the whole long distance thing. We have done, first it was France, USA, then France, Canada, then UK, Canada, and now France, Canada. And you know, a pandemic thrown in the middle of that. So we do have some experience with long distance relationship, and I've received quite a few questions over the years. I have kind of become the go-to person for long distance relationship question. It's kind of funny in my circle. So I thought I would just do a video, answer some commonly asked questions, and maybe give you tips if that's something you are going through, considering going through. First of all, maybe for some context, how did we meet?
Well, you were doing an internship in San Francisco.
Yeah.
And I had just moved to the Bay Area to do a year off of school because my sister moved there for grad school. So I was staying with her and looking for friends and new people to meet in the Bay Area. I was looking for friends. I didn't know anybody, and I had no way to meet people, so we had a dating app.
Yeah, we were both on OkCupid. To make it short, I was also looking for friends, but I was like mostly looking for friends with benefits, but also just friends with fine. Yeah, and we matched on OkCupid. So we were both living in the SF area. Technically though, when we met, we were not living right nearby.
No, I mean, as the crow flies, pretty close, but you lived in SF and I lived in Richmond, which was like an hour away.
Yeah, it was
public transport.
Like it was over an hour away by public transport. So for some people, what we had was already almost long distance, because it would be over an hour to meet. But it wasn't long distance really. Yeah, and we met and we did get serious pretty quickly. But we knew I was gonna have to leave, come back to France, since I was only in the US for a semester. I had to go back, and that's when we started being long distance. That's where I think a question I get a lot comes in, which is how do you decide if it's worth it to try a long distance relationship? Like, how do you know this is something you even want to try in the first place? What do you think?
Well, when we decided to actually like officially start dating, this was over text. I asked you over text. And
yeah, she asked me to be her girlfriend over text.
I asked you over text, and then I left. I went to Nevada for like 2 weeks or something, and because I wanted to give her time to process this and to make her own decision. And yeah, so you took a day or so to think about it, and then you called me back, and you had made like a pro-con list.
So this is gonna be an expose me video, isn't it? This is gonna be exposing me as the weirdo I am, and I'm perfectly fine with that. Go ahead.
Yeah, so you'd made a pro-con list of things to consider, like reasons we could date, reasons why we maybe shouldn't date. And we went through this list on the phone, and I was like, this makes sense. Yes, this also makes sense. And I think I added a couple of points to either side.
Which is what I'm like, yeah, that's like, you know, when you sprung on a girl that you've been making a pro-con list about dating her, and she's like, I should take note on that. I'm like, yes, okay, that's another pro.
So we added some more points to each side. We discussed this, and then we decided the pros kind of outweighed the cons. The con being somewhat that you were going to leave was basically the biggest con.
Yeah.
And that then we'd have to do long distance, and it was going to be tricky. So that being the biggest con, we were like, okay, well, we've got like another 3 months until you're leaving, so why don't we just date temporarily, and we will revisit this issue later.
And that's a privilege that we had, meeting in person first over like meeting online and already living very far apart. But I think it's very useful to just have very frank conversations. In general, that's the thing I've seen before, and it's definitely true. Having a long distance relationship forces you to have kind of serious conversation pretty early on. Like you have to kind of confront it ahead, I think. Like, you don't have to know, like, okay, this is the person I'm going to be spending the rest of my life with. Like, you don't need to be that serious, but you need to be like, okay, are we actually seriously compatible? Are we actually like sharing similar values and life goals and like important compatibility questions for a relationship? Because if you already know like there is like a major breaking point, then maybe like don't go into it. I was the one, honestly, who was the most reluctant maybe to a long distance relationship.
I didn't see it as being that big of an obstacle or mattering that much.
Yeah. Well, like I had been in a long distance relationship prior to that and it had not gone well. Yeah, we dated for a bit in person and then I initiated that conversation again, I feel like a month before I left.
Well, your mom was coming to visit.
Yes, my mom was coming to visit me in the US and I was like, well, at this point, I want to introduce her, like I want to introduce Beth to my mom, like I want to introduce Beth to my family because yeah, I actually feel strongly about her and I really feel like we could actually be a relationship for the long term. Like I feel like we can do this. I want to try this. I wasn't sure. I don't think either of us were like sure this was going to work. And I think that's important to know as well. Like, if you're unsure, that doesn't mean it's doomed. Like, if you're like, I have doubts, I have struggles, like, it doesn't mean the long distance relationship can't work. I think it's fairly normal and even healthy to not go into it being like very naive and like, oh, this is gonna be perfect, there's gonna be no issues, etc.
If anything, I think it takes a little bit of pressure off of yourself to go into it with a mindset of like, I'm gonna do my best. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work, you know?
Yeah, like, we were not like putting ourselves in a position of like, we have to just be perfect at this. It was like, we love each other and we're gonna try. And if it works, amazing. And if it doesn't, we'll have given it our best shot. And again, it's okay to not be perfectly sure. As long as you're willing to put in the efforts afterwards.
Yeah, I think if you're trying to decide like, is it worth it for you? You don't necessarily have to make a pro-con list, but it's helpful, or at least to like conceptualize it that way, as in like, what is a long distance relationship going to require of you individually, and what do you require from your partner in a long distance relationship, and what does the relationship overall require, and like, are you actually able to meet those things? Is your partner able to meet those things? Are you as a team able to do those things? And just like be frank about it, because otherwise how are you going to make an informed decision?
A lot of people say, oh, if your love language, I mean, you can look up love language if you don't know what that means, but like there are people who say that if your first or second love language is physical touch, you can't do a long distance relationship. And I'm like, you can. Like, physical touch is definitely very important for me in a relationship. That doesn't mean you can't make it work. Again, like, you know, you and your partner know best what you each require, need, want. It's very commonly said that when you enter a long distance relationship, you should have an end goal. Like, you should know when it's gonna end. We did not. We still kind of don't. So I say in general, this is a good advice. This is still good advice. It's just sometimes you can't exactly know. Like in our case, I was still like doing my master's. You are gonna start your master's. Like, we're still students. Like, we still have lots of things that are not figured out. And we both are people who are like, yeah, there are a bunch of careers we would like. And also careers that we can't exactly do absolutely everywhere. So what we did in our case is that we sat down and we looked at our different options. Where, like, individually, where could life lead us? And how do we connect these? Like, okay, I have these and these and these options for my career, future life, and you have these and these and these options. And how do we make them connect eventually?
Which is something that we're still talking about. Like, it's a continually updating thing. Yeah. Which is another thing about long distance relationships. It's like, I don't know, maybe some people can do the whole, yeah, it will end at this point and we'll move in together and, you know, whatever. It's very concrete. But I think a lot of people, you need to be ready to have those serious, frank conversations over and over and over and like it's going to change all the time. And you also have to be okay with people's answers changing and them not knowing.
Yeah, definitely. I think the uncertainty and the like not knowing moving parts thing was very stressful for me. I'm an anxious person, but it's because we were so honest about it was reassuring to me. The fact that we weren't just like not talking about it, like you need to confront the elephant in the room of like, how are you gonna meet eventually? Because to be honest, like that's still the goal. Is like, when are you going to be able to visit each other and when are you going to be able to close the distance? And it's okay if you don't have a specific plan, it's okay if you don't have a specific date, but you need to be able to brainstorm ways it's going to happen. And as you say, continue to brainstorm those ideas as your plans may change or as, you know, outside factors may change. Like I'm sure many people were planning on closing the distance during the pandemic and that fucked things up for them, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
So
it's okay if you don't have like one plan, but then you should have kind of a bank of possibilities or a bank of options that you're saying, this is my first choice, these are some other things that could happen, and then update that as needed so that your partner knows like, oh, there are options, there are possibilities. We just don't know necessarily which one will end up being what happens.
That brings naturally into another question I get a lot, which is how do you handle communication in long distance relationship? As in, how do you keep each other in each other's life? How do you feel connected? How do you just stay up to date? And things like that.
Which is another thing that I guess you have to have more honest conversations about. Because I know that you've told me before, like, I need to hear from you at this time of day. Like, I need you to tell me these things. I would prefer if you gave me more details. Like, the honesty helps me to know kind of like what you need to feel like you're a part of my life.
Yeah. So like when you say that, I feel super clingy and needy, but then I'm also like, don't be afraid of looking needy or clingy. Like if you're like, oh, but I want to be cool. Like, you know, there is the whole thing about like being the cool girlfriend, especially for women. I feel like that probably applies to men as well, but there is that whole thing of like, oh, I want to be cool. Be chill. I want to be low maintenance. I am not low maintenance. I am not low maintenance, and like I need to be okay with that. If you pretend that you need something that is less than what you actually need, then you're gonna end up resenting your partner. You're gonna like, and I feel like in general that's like my biggest like cue for when I need to like tell you, oh, I need more of this, I need blah blah blah. Because it's like, oh, if there is this thing that I kind of want, but I'm not going to resent you if I don't have it, it's just I kind of want that, then maybe it's not really worth bothering you with. But if it's like, oh, I really need this thing, this is kind of pressing, like for example, I really want a good night text. Like that was a thing, especially at the beginning of our relationship. It's like with the time difference, I like to know that she thought of me as she was falling asleep. And even if she does without sending me a text, I was like, I need like that physical manifestation that, oh, she thought of me as she was going to bed. And so that way, when I wake up in the morning, I'm like, oh, she thought of me as she was going to bed. And that's a cute thing. And that was a thing where like I needed to be honest about the fact that that was something I did need. And like, you need to have conversation about what you want in communication. I know some people in long distance relationship will call every day for like hours. We don't do that.
No.
Like first with time difference, like that's harder when you have like, we've had between like the shortest time difference we have was 5 hours. And that was only for 2 months. We've more been between 6 and 9 hours. So with that type of time difference, it's pretty hard to just call every day.
Happy for people who can talk to each other every day. But honestly, we held most of our early conversations over text anyway. And I think if you can text consistently, then it's like, I don't know, I feel like you're spending your whole day with me rather than like, you know, an hour a day when we call each other. It's like you're there all day long.
Yes.
And then we have longer phone calls. If I'm hanging out with my roommates, they'll be like, oh, I have to go to a meeting. And they'll be like, you're calling your girlfriend. I'm like, Yeah. Yeah.
You go to a meeting, actually?
Well, if I have you, like, scheduled with my other meetings, then I'll just be like, oh, I have 4 meetings today. You know, whatever. But
I'm a business meeting.
Yeah. So, but it's like, that's the kind of scheduling that it is. It's like, it's not optional. It's like, this is in my calendar.
Yes. You determine how frequent that needs to be for you, depending on your schedules, depending on how much you need. Like, at the beginning, it was like twice a week. It was twice a week for a while, actually. And then at some point, I think it was after a time where I visited you, you were like, hey, maybe we could do 3 times a week. And it was like, yeah, we can like give that a try. And that's actually very good. And yeah, now we've been on like 3 times a week for like over a year. And then during the pandemic, because we couldn't visit each other as much, we were kind of like, well, we still have like our fixed 3 times a week. But if you ever, like, we were both like, if you ever, like, need to just call me randomly for, like, 5 minutes, we can arrange that. Because we're spending so much longer apart. If there is a need for, like, a quick chat that is not in our regularly scheduled calls, like, the door is always open anyway.
Well, the door was always open in that first place.
Yeah, but, like, we kind of, like, made it more explicit when we're spending longer apart. I think a thing to like keep each other in each other's life is the random thing. Like, honestly, if you are living with your partner or if you're seeing your partner like multiple times a week to hang out, you're not always gonna have deep, meaningful conversations. Sometimes you're gonna be like, oh, I saw this funny dog. That's completely worth texting to your partner. Like, or if you're on the phone, that's worth telling your partner. Because like those are little random day-to-day things that are not important in grand intimacies, but they're like, let's just feel connected to like, how's your day been?
Yeah, which I think was why I said like maybe we should do 3 phone calls, because when it was 2 phone calls a week, you had a lot to update me on that was just like serious or like whatever stuff. Or we were having our usual serious debates, conversations about politics or whatever. And so there wasn't like a lot of room, especially because then I had like, 90 minutes or an hour for a phone call because I was at work. So then it was like, okay, we got through the serious stuff, but there wasn't a lot of just like fooling around, being silly time, which I think is important to me as well. So
yeah, I definitely appreciate that. Like sometimes we call and we're gonna talk like about our days. Like that's a lot of things. Like we'll talk about like the past few days. And like sometimes we're gonna be like, oh, have you seen like this news, like this political news? And then we'll rant at each other. And I love that.
Yeah. Or like, oh, I went to this, I read this book, or I listened to this podcast yesterday, it's really interesting, you blah 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 blah.
Or then it's also like, oh, I saw this post about like this fandom, and oh my god, I keep having thoughts about like this like show that we've watched or that she's watched or that I've watched, and then it's just like rambling about characters and just this like, yeah, it can be anything. Yeah,
I think in the randomness too, it helps if there are other ways that you can show that you were like thinking about them randomly. Like I know I will somewhat randomly send you letters, or sometimes like you sent me food randomly and then I get a text being like, hey, go check your door, and I'm like, what's at the door?
Yeah, like order delivery food, like or like I remember once where like I ordered you a cake because you had like, I don't know what important meeting you had.
It was committee meeting.
You had committee meeting, and I ordered you a cake for afterwards, and you told me when she got the cake, she was like, yeah, I thought of buying myself something, but then I was like, I'm not going to, just in case someone buys me something. And I was like, oh, wow. She knew. You're
just trying to expose me back now, but I'm not ashamed of that.
I was not trying to expose you. I was trying to show how smart you are and how well you know me.
Yeah. Yeah. I think surprise dates sometimes are good too. Like
you can do dates. You can actually have dates while long distance.
Yeah, I think like your phone calls can sometimes get a little like routine when you're long distance.
Which is okay.
Yeah, it's totally fine. But every so often you can say, hey, so today I was thinking we should do this,
Yeah, like you've done that a couple of times, and that was very lovely. It was like, hey, we could write poetry together. And it was like, oh, that sounds cool. We've done like movie watching with like drinking game that are not drinking game. Just filling dumb online tests together and comparing your results. Just whatever you can do that's just like kind of dumb and silly and spontaneous.
Yeah, I think the spontaneity is good too. Like, I know some people who have been in long distance relationships who feel like, oh, every time that we call, if you only call a couple of times a week, then it should be like a date night where you're doing something. And usually those are like, for the couple that I'm thinking of, it was usually movie nights. And I know for me, it wouldn't work very well because then it's like one of those calls per week is like watching a movie, not actually talking, and there's no spontaneity to it because it's kind of scheduled. So like, I don't know, whatever works for you and your partner, but I think that, yeah, having some spontaneity and having opportunities to like actually connect and not feeling like pressured to do normal dates where you're maybe not interacting as much.
Yeah, which is why like we did the idea of like drinking game around movies. So we're just not just watching a movie, we're pausing it regularly to interact with each other. Being like, oh, they said this word or whatever. And so that introduces an element of interactivity even into something that's more passive. Another question I got was about jealousy, and if a long distance relationship increase jealousy. And if you want the answer to that question, you're gonna have to check out part 2. Yes, this is a bit of a cliffhanger ending because we ended up filming for over an hour. So I decided to split this conversation into 3 videos. And so the next one is going to be all about jealousy, fear of cheating, how to close the distance, and also how to just handle missing one person so much. Stay tuned. I'm just doing dumb faces. I don't know why you're reacting to this. I'm just doing dumb faces.